Hi, Andy, and hi to everyone that's watching this. It's great that Andy's just released a brand new song, and we're here just to have a chat about it, to find out a bit more about why he wrote the song, how he was inspired, and what the song's about, really. So, Andy, maybe you could just start with just sharing what inspired you to write this song.
Yeah, brilliant, Nay. Thanks for this. It's great to be together. Well, I heard an ancient piece of poetry. It's actually written in part of the Bible, and it talks about the God of heaven. It says that all day long I have held out my hands, and that line just kind of echoed round my mind and got me thinking, and really is the inspiration for the song.
Thanks, Andy. Where were you when that happened? Like, was there anything else in terms of what was happening in your life that inspired you to not just read that bit of ancient poetry, but turn it into song as well?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us have had some really joyful times during this lockdown and these strange days, but also some pretty sad times. And to be honest, over the last few weeks, there's been some things going on that have been really quite heartbreaking. A really dear friend has died, and I was reflecting on that. Another friend had pointed me towards this passage, and I was thinking about the God who's made everything, and who has such authority and sovereignty, and yet he's not far off in the suffering and the brokenness, and that kind of strand comes through in this song too.
Yeah, thank you. And it is such a beautiful song. And it's amazing the way with music it enables you to feel something as well as know something. So tell us a bit about the song itself, why you love it, what it means to you.
Yeah, well, it's I think it's that message that there's a God who is powerful but also comes and suffers, and that God is a God who has his arms or his hands held open towards people who don't have any right to know him or any right to receive his love, and yet he sets his love, on men and women like us who have no access by rights to him. I think also I love the old kind of blues storytellers, who would sit on a street corner and captivate an audience with a story of something wonderful or something broken or something that is a mixture of the both. And I kind of purposely chose to try to use kind of Elmore James or old tuning of a guitar, where I had to kind of relearn how to play guitar almost to put the song together, and to convey this message of a God whose hands are held open in that genre of tuning a guitar.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I can just imagine you. I mean, I think we've sat on many a street corner in a cafe and
We
you
have.
pulled out your guitar and started singing. And, it evokes such strong memories, doesn't it? So maybe just share a bit more about, how you wrote the music and in what way you wrote it, and
Yeah.
ultimately what that communicates about God himself through the words and through the
Yeah.
music.
Yeah, well, sometimes I kind of write a song when the music and the words kind of come together. But I was experimenting with this tuning and playing around with this open D idea, this old blues thing, and I made up kind of a really up kind of bouncing kind of march sound, and I actually recorded it and was kind of excited about it. But then kind of coming into that was this thought about this ancient piece of poetry, a God whose hands are held open, and uh, and I kind of, when I try to marry these two ideas together, this kind of march turned into instead a waltz. The thing about a march is it's kind of directed, and you're all facing the same direction. But a waltz is where it kind of switches to a kind of 3, 4, 6, 8, and there's this kind of facing of people and this connection between people. And I think that the amazing thing that captivated me about this line from the New Testament is that this is a God who faces us, and he's got his arms open because he wants to draw us into his embrace. You know, a God who doesn't stay far away and distant, but rather a God who comes close in the person of Jesus. You know, a God who comes down into the mud and the muck and the brokenness, and stands with the hungry and hands them bread, and reaches to the blind person that their eyes would be opened, but ultimately who goes to a cross and takes all the pain and the wrongness and the brokenness that scars my heart, our hearts, so that it could be just taken away, so that that barrier that stands between us and God could just be removed, so that we could be drawn into relationship with him by his forgiveness, by his coming towards us in that way.
Andy, that's amazing. And that image of the waltz rather than the march is just so intriguing, isn't it? And so, it's so attractive.
Yeah.
And I wonder, for people that are listening today, I mean, you've been through really sad times in these last month or so, seeing a close friend die. Have you seen this to be true yourself? Or is it just something you're singing about?
What a good question. Yeah, no, I have. You know, perhaps some of us listening, you know, have had some real pain and anguish over these last months, and perhaps we're still there, you know. And the thing about the message of the Bible and the message of Jesus is that he's not just a concept or a philosophy that kind of makes life work better, but actually he's a person who we can know intimately, and who, well, in the records of his life, you know, stood at the grave of a friend and wept, but also comes beside us as we weep over things that are so sad and so broken, and with us in a kind of fellowship connection, shares that sadness. But this friend of mine, you know, he had a hope in this same Jesus, and he had this certainty that even in the last hours of his life, he had this peace and certainty that he was not, his life wasn't being snuffed out at this point, but that he was actually going to be opening his eyes again in the presence of this glorious Jesus with the scars, but the Jesus who took the brokenness that should have been his eternal destiny, my friend's eternal destiny, but Jesus took that instead, so that my friend's eternal destiny would be a different one. And he was convinced that he was going to open his eyes in the presence of this Jesus, this one who died and risen from the dead. So not only has it changed my experience of this sadness, but also I think it's utterly transformed the experience of my friend's death too, and others around me as well, who have that certain hope of seeing this dear friend again.
Andy, thank you. And I think we all need to hear that, don't we? That ultimately God holds out his hands to us wherever we are today. So we really recommend you listen to Andy's song, but more than that, listen to the God himself who's offering his hands to you, but also share this with your friends, that they can hear about how God can help them in these times too. So, Andy, thanks so much for writing this. Thank you for thinking carefully about the music and how the music in and of itself communicates something of the kindness of God and the compassion of God holding out his hands in these times. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nay.